Muscles typically going to rely on carbohydrates as their most efficient source of fuel, particularly at high intensity, power, speed type movements.
Okay. And what I notice working as a coach and seeing people ride is they tend to consume like 1 bar an hour or 1 gel an hour. They tend to go for this one thing an hour, which I feel doesn't tend to be enough. They need to shoot for more. Quite often you reference 60 to 90 grams per hour. So why would it be 60 to 90 grams per hour? You mentioned a client before that is way off the charts. And how would you go about that?
So, I mean, there's lots of research that's been done over the years of how much the gut can tolerate as well of carbohydrates per hour. We used to think that 90 grams of carbs per hour was sort of the top range of what your gut can tolerate at high intensities during training. But as I said, I've got an RCA member that now is about 110 grams of carbs per hour and absolutely killing it. So started at 50.
And that just works for them?
Just works for them.
And they're not that heavy, you mentioned?
No, they're only about 65 kilos.
Wow.
But the performance benefits that they have gained from that have been incredible. Started off at about 50 to 60 grams of carbs per hour and have worked up to 110 grams of, 120 sometimes of grams of carbs per hour. That has happened over a longer period of time because it's important to note that there's gut training involved. So what I mean by that is if you calculate you're having 1 gel an hour, that might be 25, 30 grams of carbs per hour. You go out and try and have 90 grams the following day, the stomach just won't be able to, or the gut just won't be able to tolerate that. So typically, you're going to get gut cramping that may result in vomiting, diarrhea, any of those sorts of things. So gut is like every other muscle though, and we can train it. So it's just practicing smaller amounts more often. And we also want to practice that at high intensities. So because your gut is under more stress at that point. So it's important to practice it at race pace as well.
Okay. So let's just say you were consuming 30 grams an hour typically on your rides and it was a banana, and you wanted to start increasing it because you watched this video. Would you increase it but in 10 gram increments or 15 gram increments? 15
gram is where I tend to go for. So, and again, it depends on the session. So if it was a zone 2 session, then maybe 30 grams would be plenty.
Yep.
But we're targeting those higher intensity and maybe even longer rides as well. So as I mentioned before, the most efficient source of fuel for the muscles is going to be carbohydrates. So yes, for power, speed, but definitely for endurance as well, particularly if the endurance ride has parts of, think of a race, if it's a really long race, there's still going to be periods of sprinting that your body is going to typically come back to carbohydrates to rely on that quick burst of energy as well.
Yes.
So if you're at 30 grams and the goal was to get up to 60 or 90, then I would start with, for 15 grams. So we go to 45, and once you can tolerate that really well, we go to 60 an hour, then we'll go to 75, then we'll go to 90 and so on.
Yes.
And that may happen very quickly, and it may happen over a longer period of time for a lot of people as well.
And is it a case of just finding out what works best for you, or thinking about what your body weight is or how many calories you're burning in an hour?
What works best for you, because as I said, I've got some athletes that may be 90 kilos and some athletes that may be 60 kilos, and they're both consuming very similar amounts of carbohydrates per hour. What you eat for the rest of the day is going to be dependent on all those other bits and pieces that you mentioned, body weight, your body composition goals, those sorts of things. However, and calories that you're burning and things like that. But during training sessions, just keep it simple, and we're focusing purely on a carbohydrate per hour goal.
Yeah, okay. And in terms of your gut being able to digest certain types of carbohydrates, is there something that we need to know there?
So basically, once we reach over 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour, we need to have carbohydrates in 2 different forms. So most sports nutrition products are, either glucose or maltodextrin based. Which is a simple, a type of sugar. We want to include a ratio of 2 to 1, so 2 parts maltodextrin or glucose to 1 part fructose. And the reason for that is after 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour, the gut can't digest just that single form of carbohydrate. We have to have a multi-form carbohydrate source.
And do most nutritional products that you would take on the bike have that, or you need to keep an eye out for that?
Need to keep an eye on that. So it's definitely, and fructose is very sweet, so keep in mind that it's often harder to take large amounts of it, and that's where that gut training comes in. Most products are a single form, but there's definitely a lot of sports nutrition products out there that are doing 2 to 1 ratios now.
Okay. Are there any ones you recommend?
Yeah, so a couple of my favourite brands.
Not sponsored, by the way.
No, not sponsored, but again, some of my favourite brands. Science and Sport do a couple of different products now that are 2-to-1 ratio.
Okay.
The Beta Fuel, and they do a gel as well. Morton do a couple of products that are 2-to-1, and then Infinite as well. You can make up your own blend and add fructose to it as well to get that 2-to-1 ratio.
Okay. And you mentioned a good point there regarding gels. So if you are consuming gels as part of your 60 to 90 grams per hour, what about, in order to optimize that gel and the digestive aid of it, how much fluid should you be taking?
Depends on the gel, typically around 200 to 300 mils, but there are a couple of brands. So Science and Sport, or SIS, is a great example.
They're very liquidy, the gels.
An isotonic, so they've diluted theirs a little bit so that it's not as concentrated. The reason for that is if you just think, how much a gel is, if there's 30 grams worth of carbohydrates in that and you've only got, 40 mils worth of liquid, the concentration of that is very, very high, and that puts a lot of stress on your gastrointestinal system whilst you're exercising. So you could probably have a gel sitting here doing nothing and it would be fine without any liquid. When you're on the bike and your body is trying to draw blood to the muscles to work, as well as put blood through the gastrointestinal system to digest food, it becomes very hard without diluting that. So we need to make sure that there's a lot of liquid coming in at the same time as 30 grams worth of carbohydrates in a very small amount. Okay.
And you also mentioned in some previous content about the Morton gels. I was curious about those because they're almost like a jelly.
Hydrogel.
Yeah, so do you need to consume a similar amount of water as other gels with those? Because you almost chew those. They're interesting.
They are. You still need to consume a little bit. And again, you still should be consuming liquid as part of your plan anyway, whether that's through a training session or race. But yeah, you still need to dilute that concentrated amount of carbohydrates so that the gut can absorb it properly.
Okay. Yep. And final one, just on a strategy to get to say 60 or 90 per hour. I know a lot of people wait until the second hour before they start, which is probably too late. So you need to maybe have a strategy starting with your first hour. What do you recommend to clients? Do they start at 20 minutes and then every 20 minutes they have something, or every half an hour, or what have you seen work?
Both. Some people love to just take something on the hour mark every hour, but it depends. Like if you're trying to consume 90 grams in a 5-minute period, that becomes very, very hard. So it's usually every sort of 30 minutes. Some people like every 15 minutes, and it helps them pass the time quicker if they know that they can eat something or consume something every 15 minutes. So very individualized, but always having a bit of a time that you're having it on. In different events, it may be that you need to manipulate that so that it's at the bottom of a hill that you're consuming a set amount of carbohydrates to get you to the top of that hill or peak or whatever it might be. So it's very dependent on the plan, the person. In a training session, to keep it simple, I usually say every 30 minutes, take something as you can, and trying to start at the first 30 minutes so that you're not hitting the wall before you start to play and start to try and play catch up.